Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR podcast. I am Race for the Prize. Let's take a look at the previous optimal lineups at Bristol for the Cup Series. The winning lineup may not be this perfect, but let's look at the perfect lineup. But first, racefortheprize.com. That is where you can go to access the Fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet like the optimal lineups that we're about to look at. $27 for the month of March. Oh, but I missed Phoenix. You want to talk pro rate? Send me an email, DM. We'll see if we can work something out. Let's just do a quick overlook. Let's make sure we put the K on the end of that. Of the last four at Bristol. 3 expensive drivers, 3 cheap drivers. Now remember, we've got Bristol dirt races that we have to exclude. So this will be 2023, 2022, 2021, and then we're looking at 2020 fall. And then if you go back from there, it's 2 races per season. So 2023, 3 expensivos, hogs, dominators, if you will, fast laps / lap leaders, and then to afford these big dogs taking over the show, you got to go cheap. 2022, this is a little different because Chris Buescher was mispriced. Can't fault DraftKings. Some people still don't believe in Chris Buescher to this day, but in 2022, first season of RFK, Brad Keselowski rolling in. Although the team had been making strides, this was really the breakthrough. Not surprised here. So since your hog was so cheap, he allows you to really go in a different direction. Still, you've got 3 big hogs just hogging all those fast laps and laps led points and keeping them all to themselves. And those greedy guys make you have to go cheap on the other end, but not necessarily in this race because 2 of them were really cheap. 2 of them were underpriced. 2 of them were on the same team. And those 2 drivers, Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher, would have some hot rods in 2023. Alert, alert. Driver good in 2022. Alert, alert. Driver good in 2023. Alert, alert. Did I say both drivers and team? 2024, the year of RFK. You're definitely going to want to look at RFK Fords at Bristol. I mean, you even got Keselowski here well, that was when he was Team Penske. Yeah. And he was struggling in 2021. We expected a lot more from him in 2021 after what I thought he was going to win the championship at Phoenix in 2020. But 2021 was definitely a step down for BK, and he still had a good race here. He stole the notes. It's the Rosenbergs. He stole the atomic secrets and gave it to the Russians. He took all Penske's ideas and gave it to looks like he did. It's definitely the Rosenberg situation here of Keselowski taking all of his notes with him to RFK. And because you've got these 2 cheap guys, you then can spend up for a place differential play in Elliott and Byron, who really don't give you that much. And Adrian just has a good day. We'll go a little bit more into that. So maybe a bit of an outlier here. Depends on what kind of pricing that we get. But for whatever reason, if we go into this year's race at DraftKings and there's a drivers that we really like, we think that are mispriced, then this could be an optimal lineup that you look to. All right, we'll go back to 2021, the year of Kyle Larson. And you've got an expensive hog here. You got an expensive hog here. Kevin Harvick, yes. SHR were on the decline when we got into 2021. But still, even in 2021, when we were using varying packages and they still had horsepower, Stewart-Haas Racing was good at the short tracks, short flat tracks, short Bristol tracks. Almirola had a win at New Hampshire. There was several really strong performances across the team at the shorter tracks. And for Kevin Harvick to do that, not a surprise. Ryan Blaney, $9,400, 27 hog points. Not as much as we normally see from the third selection in our lineups. We always see 1 biggie and 2 very big and 2 bigs. When you're building a Bristol lineup, it's very common, almost always 2 big dog hogs. And then even the third's coming in slopping things up pretty good. That's a pretty low performance, but that can be explained by Kyle Larson's devastating performance where, third can only do so much when you got Kyle Larson in the year of the Larson just wiping people out. And then you got Brad Keselowski getting scrapes off some points here and there. And then you've got 2 cheapies instead of 3 cheapies. here we can't really talk about the cheapies because the cheapies were the hogs. So for the record, I mean, we got 3 cheaps over in 2023, 2 cheaps in 2021. Let's look at the 2020 fall race. Another playoff race. It is worth mentioning, and I'm going to keep bringing this up all week. We're looking at a lot of data from the last 3 playoff races at Bristol. Races where most of the field is winding down the season. Most of the field is deferential to the lap leaders. It's not always the case, but we have seen the spring races run a little bit more hairy, where everybody still has a chance, and the lap leaders are less deferential. They're more of a handful. Even if they make the leader just painfully work for 5 more laps, over the course of leads changing for 500 laps, the probability of chaos increases. I don't have any hard facts on it. I have reviewed some of the spring versus fall data, and it does seem, but I think I need to look at a larger sample size, that the spring race does tend to get a little bit more chaotic. And we've had some massive caution-filled races. Last year's fall race, playoff race, not the case. And if you get chaos, it's going to completely change these lineups. But even then, you're still typically going to get 3 guys with hog points. Now, I think in 2020 spring, it was a special one for me. It kind of bucked the trend, and you didn't end up with a bunch of hogs. Pretty fluky. But I would suspect that even if you get chaos, there still is going to be drivers that score the most fantasy points that have a lot of hog points. You know, occasionally we'll get a lap leader that gets taken out. So you're saying, oh, well, I'll need less lap leaders. Usually one just takes their place. You know, a lot of times it'll happen early in the race. And so then it's like, oh, well, there's still 300 more laps left for new guys to score a bunch of points. And in the end, like, even though there was chaos, you still ended up with 3 guys with 30, 50, and 70 hog points. 2020 fall, you got Kevin Harvick, no surprise. This was the year of Harvick and Hamlin stinking up the show, starting on the front row every single week. Kyle Busch has a strong week. You only end up with 2 in this scenario. And a lot of that was because pricing was often pretty tough because they knew the qualifying grid before the race even began every single week. You remember those dark COVID days where they knew where everyone was going to start so they could price them accordingly. You never really got that many deals. So you got drivers priced correctly, and they hogged all the hog points. So like in this similar situation where Blaney can only scrape off 27, you got, because of Larson's big performance, well, you know, that 27 got shifted up into the second bracket over here. That 27 got shifted up into Kyle Busch. So we only had 2 hogs. And then we chased place differential with Eric Jones, who was still a JGR. Tyler Reddick in his first year as RCR coming around. Chris Buescher, not a surprise, and Michael Dow, another driver who is pretty slow and steady at Bristol. And you get 16 place differential, 15 place differential. And remember, the qualifying grid was set by all those silly metrics from weeks past. So you probably remember chasing place differential quite often in 2020. You're not always going to get that at Bristol. That was a quick look. Now, my biggest takeaway, to summarize what I think the proper build is going to be, and I will go closer inspection to show you what I think. The thing that you're going to notice with these optimal lineups, where did they finish? What was their DFS score? 1, 2, and 3 for Christopher Bell, and 1, 2, and 3 in terms of DFS. All right, that was last year. So the top 3 finishers also were top 3 in DFS. We've got the first place, we got the second place, we got the third place in the optimal lineup. They didn't finish 1, 2, and 3 on the board, but they did finish 1, 5, and 7. Not 1, 2, and 3 DFS, but into the race, your podium was in the optimal lineup. Look at 2021. Optimal lineup. We actually don't have the podium, but we got 1, 2, 4. Can't afford 3, which is Ryan Blaney. So it goes. So we take, or no, we can, yeah, we can afford Blaney. We can't afford William Byron. Either way, we're starting to see a little bit of a pattern here. If I go back to the fall, again, finishing position, you actually have 1, 2, 3, and 4 in real life finishing position. Harvick, Busch, Jones, Reddick, and you have 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the DFS scoreboard. You need, so I think a way to frame it to maybe make it easier to digest and to prepare, because I know what you're saying. 500 laps of fast laps and laps led. How do I predict that? And that is true. When it's all said and done, you got to pick the hogs. You got to pick the guys that lead the most laps and have the most fast laps. And you're like, I can't predict the sequencing or the pit stops, or I don't know. I mean, I can tell the guy is going to be fast, but he's still got to get out into clean air to get those fast laps. And it can seem daunting at times. And you might make a mistake and second guess yourself. So here's what I want you to do. Yeah, you do have to pick the driver that leads the most laps and the second guy. But also, to simplify that, as we have shown you with the last 4 optimal lineups, you got to pick the podium. And I know that's not easier, but that's less challenging. You only have to pick 1 lap instead of who's going to lead 500 laps, who's going to lead 200 laps, who's going to be fast in the middle of stage 2. No, you really just need to pick who's going to be fast on lap 500. Who will finish 1, 2, and 3. Does that make it easier for you? When you're picking your top 3 guys, yeah, they tend to run the most fast laps and lead laps. And they also tend to score the most fantasy points, which means they also tend to run the most fast laps. So rather than pick fast laps and laps led, just reverse it. Run it back a step. The fast laps are going to lead the top 3 DFS scores, but the top 3 DFS scores also correlate very strongly with the top 3 finishing positions. So your job this week when nailing your top 3 picks is just to nail the top 3 in terms of the betting market. So if you want to double down on that when you're building your fantasy NASCAR lineups, also taking your guys you love the most and then putting wagers on them, even parlaying that, teasing that out, seems like a pretty good strategy. 4 and 5 we will skip for now. Your 6th guy typically is a punt. 2 times in the last 4 years it's been J.J. Yaley. You just need salary relief. He has been halfway decent. I didn't mention this when I was talking about the previous podcast, when I broke down every driver. I should have. JJ just stays out of trouble. The Rick Ware car hung on, had a solid finish in 2023. Avoided the chaos, avoided the wrecks, hung with it. If they've made that car any little bit better, then maybe the Ware cars could be someone that you consider this week. I mean, they absolutely have to be. We've seen J.J. Yaley in 2 of the last 3 Bristol races get in the off the line. So you have to consider them, period. But you may be even more bullish as they've put more funding into the Rick Ware cars. It's just all about staying clean while others wreck, while others make mistakes. And you didn't need a bunch of wrecks when you're starting last. There wasn't a lot of chaos in the 2023 race. Just a handful of guys got wrecked, had bad moments, lost a couple laps. But even then, one of the things that's really encouraging, I guess I could put this on the screen, with J.J. Yaley in that race, I know it's not turning into the J.J. Yaley podcast, but we are looking at the punts. So since we've already covered the 3 hogs, and there is typically 1 to 2 punts in our lineups, in defense of this punts, you look at JJ, one of the things that obviously stays out of trouble, and he doesn't make any mistakes. And so AJ wrecked, BJ lost a wheel, Austin wrecked, Ty Dillon ran into the LaJoy wreck, Logano ran into the LaJoy wreck, Haley ran into the LaJoy wreck, Newman ran into the LaJoy wreck. So that alone bumps him up to 26th through attrition. But what I find really encouraging here is that Yaley just outraced Briscoe. He outraced Burton, and he outraced Kevin Harvick. Had a better race than those guys. They didn't necessarily get into wrecks or have big issues. And you can see it right here. Yaley's in 27th. Briscoe is in 28th. Briscoe ain't getting by. And eventually, Yaley actually is able to pass Harrison Burton right here at the end. And Harvick just doesn't do anything. It's out there lapping. So that's very encouraging for the Rick Ware car. And as I just showed you before, we have the meats. No, we have to punt sometimes down here. And I believe this is probably more of a typical lineup where we are really spinning up for 1, 2, 3, and then find some cheapies. Hocefer had a good race, but he played the pit sequencing correctly. Either way, still had really a good race. Todd Gilliland simply played the pit sequencing correctly. Yaley survived. I'm not going to provide context for all of these. Here, we had a bit of an outlier because Kozlowski and Buescher were way too cheap. We'll go back to a more traditional here in 2021. And, yeah, Yaley's back on the board. And we get a cheap Eric Jones. This is Eric Jones's first year with Legacy Motor Club. Actually, it's probably still RPM at that time. Cheap, but gets in there at 6,400. He is a former Bristol winner. No, he didn't win at Bristol, but he led a ton of laps at JGR. It's not a complete surprise. Keep your nose clean. Get some place differential. Make it work. Then we go back here, which I think, again, is a more of a traditional build where we got 3 cheapies. McDowell, Buescher, and remember, this was when Roush was not on the greatest of their moments. And Tyler Reddick during some dark days at RCR. And then JGR Eric Jones when he was with JGR, Busch, and Harvick. So construction-wise, I'm definitely going with 1 sub-6 for sure. I may end up with 3 in the 6s. It really depends on how expensive your 1, 2, 3. If the 1, 2, and 3 finishings that I'm targeting are expensive, then this is the build. If I can get a little bit of savings with my 1, 2, 3, then my 4 and 5, because I am targeting first, second, and third. End of story. Not messing with that. Now, if I have more money for 4 and 5, that is where the data suggests that you're going to want a top 10 from these drivers, and you're going to want around, on average, 12 place differential points. If we were to look at the average place differential, right here, 13, 15, 4, 14, 21, 13, 5, 14. If I have the money, I am chasing place differential. If I don't have the money, I'm still chasing place differential, but that's where I'm going, and I also want a top 10. I probably won't get a top 10 if I've got 3 biggies and 3 smalls, but if I have a little bit of salary relief here, then I need to make sure that in my 4 and 5 spots that I'm getting around 12 place differential and I'm getting a top 10 finish. I don't need that if I'm forced into stars and scrubs. I don't think I need that if I am stars and scrubs, although these guys were pretty close. They were really close. Again, though, that was a different era in qualifying. Hopefully that was helpful in helping you build your fantasy NASCAR lineup at DraftKings. Blessed to have you guys around. Racefortheprize.com. Love you guys. Trip to Life's fantastic.